Good evening, all. So, hello, welcome to Montagfire Reads. I am Lee, and Our Haunted Shores is a book released by the British Library. These are lovely books, obviously, and there are so many of them that it's going to basically I'm going to have to remortgage my house to buy them all. But anyway, I bought this one in Falmouth in Cornwall, which is very apt. And it was from the Maritime Museum, which I didn't go into because it cost 20 quid, way too much money. And I'm sure it's fantastic. I do remember going there before. I don't remember it being quite so expensive, but anyway. But in their shop was this, The Haunted Shore. So I bought this, and I thought, oh, do you know what? I'll go into Falmouth and find a nice spot and start reading some bits to camera. And I spent most of the day in Falmouth. I couldn't find anywhere good to read it. To camera, so I thought I'll just bring it home and do it at some point. And now this is the point. And the great thing is, for me anyway, the exciting thing is I haven't actually read any of these. Actually, that's a lie. There's probably one or two in there that I've read before. The Crooking Sands, for instance, by Bram Stoker. But they have got some folk tales and a few poems too. So I'm going to read a poem first. This is The Haunted Beach by Mary Robinson. 1757 to 1800, author, actor, high-profile celebrity figure in English society and gossip columns, born in Bristol. So there's a bit more about her there, but you need to buy the book really to appreciate the full bio. And the other thing is I haven't read this poem, and I haven't read the other folk tale that I'm about to read as well. So this is new to me. So I hope you enjoy it. It's called The Haunted Beach. Upon a lonely desert beach, where the white foam was scattered, a little shed upreared its head. Through lofty barks were shattered. The seaweeds gathered near the door, a sombre path displayed, and all around the deafening roar re-echoed on the chalky shore by the green billows made. Above, a jutting cliff was seen where seabirds hovered craving, and all around the crags were bound with weeds forever waving. And here and there, a cavern wide, its shadowy jaws displayed, and near the sands, at ebb of tide, a shivered mast was seen to ride where the green billows strayed. And often, while the moaning wind stole o'er the summer ocean, the moonlight scene was all serene, the waters scarce in motion. Then while the smoothly slanting sand, the tall cliff wrapped in shade, the fisherman beheld a band of spectres gliding hand in hand, where the green billows played. And pale their faces were as snow, and sullenly they wandered, and to the skies with hollow eyes they looked as though they pondered. And sometimes from their hammock shroud they dismal howlings made, and while the blast blew strong and loud, the clear moon marked the ghastly crowd where the green billows played. And then above the haunted hut the curlews screaming hovered, and the low door with furious roar the frothy breakers covered. For in the fisherman's lone shed a murdered man was laid, with 10 wide gashes in his head, and deep was made his sandy bed where the green billows played. A shipwrecked mariner was he, doomed from his home to sever, who swore to be through wind and sea firm and undaunted ever. And when the wave resistless rolled, about his arm he made a packet rich of Spanish gold, and like a British sailor bold, plunged where the billows played. The spectre band, his messmates brave, sunk in the yawning ocean, while to the mast he lashed him fast and braved the storm's commotion. The winter moon upon the sand a silvery carpet made, and marked the sailor reach the land, and marked his murderer wash his hand where the green billows played. And since that hour the fisherman has toiled and toiled in vain, For all the night the moony light gleams on the spectred main. And when the skies are veiled in gloom, the murderer's liquid way bounds o'er the deeply yawning tomb, and flashing fires the sands illume where the green billows play. For full 30 years his task has been, day after day more weary, for heaven designed his guilty mind should dwell on prospects dreary. Bound by a strong and mystic chain, he has not power to stray, but destined misery to sustain. He wastes in solitude and pain, a loathsome life away. That's a great little story, isn't it? I mean, poem, should I say. How wonderful. Right, so, there are 2 sonnets. Let's try those. So, Charlotte Smith, 2 sonnets by Charlotte Smith, 1797, 1787, these were written. And she lived from 1749 to 1806. Not an age, is it? Was an English romantic poet and novelist. So there we are. Again, I think you need to buy the book, really, to enjoy the bio. But this is an interesting title. Again, I haven't read this yet, but anyway. On being cautioned against walking on a headland. Hang on, let's get this right. The title is On being cautioned against walking on an headland, overlooking the sea because it was frequented by a lunatic. I'm sure you all know one. Here it is. Is there a solitary wretch who hies to the tall cliff, with starting pace or slow, and measuring views with wild and hollow eyes its distance from the waves that chide below? Who, as the sea-born gale with frequent sighs chills his cold bed upon the mountain turf, with hoarse, half-uttered lamentation lies murmuring responses to the dashing surf. In moody sadness, on the giddy brink, I see him more with envy than with fear. He has no nice felicities that shrink from giant horrors, wildly wandering here. He seems, uncursed with reason, not to know the depth or the duration of his woe. That deserves a few reads, but I hear what she's trying to say there. Sonnet, oh wait a minute, oh yeah, so this is just simply called Sonnet XL1V, which, hang on, Roman numerals here, what's that, 10, 15, 14 I think, Sonnet 14. Pressed by the moon, mute arbitress of tides, while the loud equinox its power combines, the sea no more its swelling surge confines, but o'er the shrinking land sublimely rides. The wild blasts, rising from the western cave, drives the huge billows from their heaving bed, tears from their grassy tombs the village dead, and breaks the silent Sabbath of the grave. With shells and seaweed mingled on the shore, lo, their bones whiten in the frequent wave, but vain to them the winds and water rave. They hear the warring elements no more, while I am doomed, by life's long storm oppressed, to gaze with envy on their gloomy rest. Somebody's very sad in their skin there. So, like I say, these are first readings, which is always a bit fun, isn't it? And I think there is further through a couple of folk tales which would be interesting to read, because I don't know how they're written or who they're written by, in fact. 2 folk tales. Okay, here we are. Let's do that one. Should I do that one? The White Dobby. Yeah, let's do that, because that's an interesting title. Okay, this is 2 folk tales by James Bowker, Bowker. James Bowker offers a vision of the northwest coast of England, of Morecambe Bay, haunted by fairy sprites a version of the common wanderer figure, accompanied here by a spectral animal familiar. The fate of the strange pilgrim in the white dobby might put us in mind of the guilty fisherman of Mary Robinson's Haunted Beach. There we go, that's a nice link. Let's do the white dobby. Many years ago, long before the lovely Furness district was invaded by the genius of steam, the villagers along the coast from Bardsea to Rampside were haunted by a wandering being whose errand, the purpose of which could never be learned, used to bring him at night along the lonely roads and past the straggling cottages. This pilgrim was a wearied, emaciated-looking man, on whose worn and wan face the sorrows of life had deep left traces, and in whose feverish, hungry-looking eyes mystery and terror seemed to lurk. Nobody knew the order of his coming or going, for he neither addressed anyone, nor replied if spoken to, but disregarded alike the good neat of the tramp who knew him not, and the startled cry of the belated villager who came suddenly upon him at a turn of the road. Never stopping even for a minute to gaze through the panes whence streamed the ruddy glow of the wood fires, and to envy the dwellers in the cosy cottages, he kept on his way, as though his mission was one of life and death, and therefore would not brook delay. On wild, wintry nights, however, when the salt wind whirled the foam across the bay, and dashed the blinding snow into heaps upon the window sills and against the cottage doors, and darkness and storm spread their sombre wings over the coast, then was it certain that the mysterious being would be seen, for observation had taught the villagers and the dwellers in solitary houses along the lonely roads between the fishing hamlets in that storm and darkness the weird voyager was most likely to appear. At such times, when the sound of footsteps, muffled by the snow, was heard between the soughs and moans of the wailing wind, the women cried, "Heaven save us! 'Tis the white dobby!" As, convulsively clutching their little ones closer to their broad bosoms, they crept nearer to the blazing log upon the hearth, and gazed furtively and nervously at the little diamond-paned window, past which the restless wanderer was making his way, his companion running along a little way in advance, for not of the mysterious man alone were the honest people afraid. In front of him there invariably ran a ghastly-looking, scraggy, white hare, with bloodshot eyes. No sooner, however, did anyone look at this spectral animal than it fled to the wanderer, and jumping into his capacious pocket was lost to sight. Verily, of an unearthly stock was this white hare, for upon its approach, and long before it neared the village, the chained dogs, by some strange instinct conscious of its coming, trembled in terror, and frantically endeavoured to snap their bonds, and fasten ones fled no man knew whither. And if one happened to be trotting alongside its belated master, as he trudged homeward, and chanced to meet the ghastly dobby with its blood-red eyes, with a scream of pain almost human in its keen intensity, away home scampered the terrified animal, madly dashing over hedge and ditch as though bewitched and fiend chased. For many years the lonely wanderer had traversed the roads, and for many years had the hare trotted in front of him. Lads who were cradled upon their mother's knee when first they heard the awe-inspiring footfalls had grown up into hearty, wide-chested men, and men who were ruddy fishers when the pilgrim first startled the dwellers in Furness had long passed away into silent land. But none of them ever had known the wayfarer to utter a syllable. At length, however, the time came when the solemn silence was to be broken. One night, when the breeze, tired of whispering its weird messages to the bare branches and chasing the withered leaves along the lanes, had begun to moan, a hushed prelude to the music of a storm. Through the mist that had crept over the bay, and which obscured even the white-crested wavelets at the foot of the hill on which stood the sacred old church, there came at measured intervals the melancholy monotone of the barred sea passing bell for the dead. Dismally, upon the ears of the dwellers in the straggling hamlet fell the announcements of the presence of death, and even the woman who had for years been bell ringer and sexton felt a thrill of fear as she stood in the tower but dimly lighted by candle in a horn lantern, and high above her head the message of warning rang out. For, although accustomed to the task, it was not often that her services were required at night. Now and again she gazed slowly around the chamber, upon the mouldering walls of which fantastic shadows danced, and she muttered broken fragments of prayers in a loud and terrified voice. For, as the door had been closed in order that the feeble light in the lantern might not be extinguished by the gusts of wind, isolated as she was from the little world upon the hillside, she felt in an unwonted manner the utter loneliness of the place and its dread surroundings. Suddenly she uttered a shrill shriek, for she heard a hissing whisper at her ear, and felt an icy breath upon her neck. She dared not turn around, for she saw that the door opened upon the churchyard, remained closed as before, and that occasionally passing within the range of her fixed stare, a white hare with blood-red eyes gambolled around the belfry. "To Dobby," sighed she, as the dim light began to flicker and the hare suddenly vanished. As she stood, almost paralysed, again came the terrible whisper, and this time she heard the question, "Who for this time?" The horrified woman was unable to answer, and yet powerless to resist the strange fascination which forced her to follow the direction of the sound. And when the question was put a second time, in an agony of fear she gazed into the wild eyes of the being at her elbow, her parched tongue cleaving to her open mouth. From the pocket of the dread visitor, the ghastly animal gazed at the ringer, who mechanically jerked the bell rope. And the poor woman was fast losing her senses when suddenly the door was burst open, and a couple of villagers, who had been alarmed by her irregular ringing, entered the tower. They at once started back as they saw the strange group, the wanderer with sad inquiring look and pallid face, the phantom hare with its firelit eyes, and the old ringer standing as though in a trance. No sooner, however, did one of the intruders gaze at the animal than it slipped out of sight down into the pocket of its companion and keeper, and the wanderer himself hastily glided between the astonished men and out into the darkness of the graveyard. On many other gloomy nights afterwards, the ringer was accosted in the same manner. But although the unnatural being and the spectral hare continued for some winters to pass from village to village and from graveyard to graveyard, a thick cloud of mystery always hung over and about them, and no one ever knew what terrible sin the never-resting man had been doomed to expiate by so lonely and lasting a pilgrimage. Whence he came and whither he went remained unknown, but long as he continued to patrol the coast, the hollow sound of his hasty footsteps never lost its terror to the cottagers. And even after years had passed over without the visual visits, allusions to the weird pilgrim and his dread companion failed not to cause a shudder, for it was believed that the hare was the spirit of a basely murdered friend, and that the restless voyager was the miserable assassin, doomed to a wearisome, lifelong wandering. Oh, nice twist. Well, I've never read that before, and that was great. Never heard of that. What a fantastic short film that would make. The White Dobby. Anyway, there you are. That's tonight's readings done. And next time I will read probably an E.F. Benson. I think I've promised that a couple of times. Mrs. Amsworth sounds like quite a fun one to read. So perhaps that will be the one next week. So I'm looking over there. I should be looking here. And if you enjoyed that story and you want to support the things I do to make this better, I can't really do anything clever with this. There's no titles or anything along those lines. I just don't have the time to do it. But by tipping me and giving me a coffee or whatever, that kind of helps a little bit in finding time and putting some money towards other equipment and bits like that. So if you fancy it, fantastic. Do support the arts. I presume this is arts. And obviously I would probably recommend following some other readers as well. One particular favourite of mine is Tony Walker. So if you like ghost stories and classic ghost stories, he's got a lovely timbre to his voice, and he has done a lot of readings. I think I prefer his readings to most because they're quite they're not trying to overdo it dramatically too much. He's good with accents and things like that. So although a couple of my stories might cross over to ones that he's done, we both will read obviously very, very differently. So I would recommend Tony Walker, classic, I think it's called Classic Ghost Stories podcast. So yeah, do go and check him out. But yes, so like I say, I will be back next week with another story. And keep spooked, man. Keep spooked. There were some good stories there. The Dobby. I wonder whether that Dobby comes from... I wonder if it's the Dobby that ended up being called Dobby in Harry Potter. Probably is, isn't it? Intriguing.